By the saints, I have more leisure time than a nobleman's son. These words, spoken by a common peasant in the year 1347, would shock every historian who believed medieval life was nothing but endless toil and suffering. For centuries, we have been told that peasants lived in constant misery, working from dawn till dusk, barely surviving on scraps. But what if I told you that a medieval peasant enjoyed more holidays than most modern workers? What if they had job security we can only dream of today? What if their children played games we still recognize, and their marriages were filled with more choice than we ever imagined? The truth about medieval peasant life has been buried beneath layers of myth and misconception. Today, we uncover a world where common folk possessed freedoms, festivities, and fortunes that would astound you. This is not the story you learned in school. This is the real medieval world. When you picture a medieval peasant, what comes to mind? A hunched figure in rags, trudging through mud, barely able to feed their starving children? This image has been painted by centuries of storytellers, but it bears little resemblance to reality. The truth is far more fascinating. Medieval peasants were not the downtrodden slaves of popular imagination. They were shrewd negotiators, skilled craftsmen, and surprisingly prosperous members of society. But how did we get it so wrong? Let us begin with the most shocking revelation. Medieval peasants worked fewer days than you do. In the year 1200, the average peasant worked approximately 150 days per year. Compare this to our modern expectation of 250 working days annually. How was this possible? The medieval calendar was filled with holy days, what we now call holidays. Every saint's feast day meant no work. Religious festivals lasted for days, sometimes weeks. Add to this the winter months when agricultural work simply could not be done, and you begin to understand why peasant life moved to a very different rhythm than our own. But here lies our first mystery. If peasants worked so little, how did medieval society function? How did they feed themselves? How did they build those magnificent cathedrals that still stand today? The answer lies in understanding what work meant in the medieval world. When a peasant worked, they worked with purpose and intensity unknown to many today. But more importantly, they worked within a system that protected them in ways we have forgotten. Take young William the Plowman, a peasant from a small English village in 1315. William owned his own plow, a valuable piece of equipment worth more than a modern automobile in relative terms. He possessed detailed knowledge of crop rotation, weather patterns, and soil management that would impress agricultural scientists today. But William was no slave to the land. He could not be dismissed from his holding without cause. His lord could not simply take his property or increase his obligations without agreement from the village court. William had what we would call job security, property rights, and legal protection. This challenges everything we thought we knew about medieval hierarchy. Does it not? Medieval peasants were far wealthier than commonly believed. Archaeological evidence reveals homes filled with valuable possessions. Quality tools, decorative pottery, silver coins, and even books in some households. Consider the inventory of Thomas the Miller from Wiltshire, recorded in 1327. His possessions included 3 changes of clothing in different colors, a feather bed with linen sheets, silver spoons and pewter plates, a collection of religious books, 2 horses and 6 pigs, and a store of grain worth 6 months of a night's wages. Thomas was not exceptional. Village records across Europe tell similar stories of peasant prosperity. But this raises another puzzle. Where did this wealth come from? Medieval villages were not isolated, backward places, but bustling centers of commerce and industry. Every village had its specialists. The miller, the blacksmith, the carpenter, the alewife. These were not simple farmers scratching out a living, but skilled professionals serving local and regional markets. The alewife deserves special mention, for she challenges our assumptions about medieval women. These women owned and operated their own businesses, controlled their own finances, and wielded considerable influence in village affairs. They were entrepreneurs in every sense of the word. But the mystery deepens when we discover that many peasants engaged in long-distance trade. Village records show peasants traveling to distant markets, sometimes crossing multiple kingdoms to buy and sell goods. How did supposedly bound serfs manage such freedom of movement? This brings us to perhaps the greatest misconception about medieval peasant life, the belief that all peasants were serfs, bound to the land like slaves. In reality, by the year 1300, the majority of peasants in many regions were free. They could leave their villages, choose their occupations, and marry whom they pleased. Even among those who were technically serfs, the restrictions were far less severe than commonly believed. Serfdom itself was not slavery. Serfs could not be bought or sold as individuals. They owned property, engaged in business, and often accumulated considerable wealth. Many serfs were wealthier than free peasants in other regions. But here lies a fascinating paradox. Why did some free peasants actually choose to become serfs? What advantages did serfdom offer that freedom did not? The answer reveals the true genius of medieval village life, the power of community bonds and mutual obligation. Serfs received protection from their lords, protection from bandits, from harvest failures, from economic disasters. In times of famine, the lord was obligated to feed his serfs. In times of war, he was bound to defend them. This was not charity but legal obligation, enforced by custom and church law. Free peasants enjoyed liberty but faced risks that serfs did not. A free peasant's harvest failure meant potential starvation. A serf's harvest failure meant the lord's obligation to provide relief. Medieval peasants understood something we have forgotten. Absolute freedom and absolute security are often incompatible. They made conscious choices about which they valued more. But medieval peasants were not consumed only with work and survival. Their lives were filled with pleasures and entertainments that challenge our grim stereotypes. Village festivals were elaborate affairs lasting for days. Wrestling matches, dancing, music, and theatrical performances filled the calendar. Peasants played games we still recognize, chess, backgammon, and various ball games that resembled modern football. Taverns served as community centers where peasants gathered to share news, conduct business, and enjoy each other's company. The quality of medieval ale was often superior to the watered-down beverages of later centuries. Even peasant marriages were more romantic than commonly believed. Church records reveal that most peasant marriages were based on mutual affection rather than pure economic arrangement. Couples often courted for months or even years before marriage, and forced marriages, while they occurred, were actively discouraged by both church and community. Perhaps no myth about medieval peasant life is more persistent than the belief that they ate nothing but thin gruel and moldy bread. Archaeological evidence tells a different story. Peasant diets were varied and often nutritious. They consumed meat regularly, not just at special occasions but as part of their normal diet. Pork, chicken, and fresh fish were common. Vegetables and fruits were abundant during harvest seasons and carefully preserved for winter consumption. Medieval peasants brewed their own ale, which was often safer to drink than water and provided essential nutrients. They made cheese, preserved meats, and created complex dishes that would be recognizable in any modern kitchen. The medieval peasant's diet was certainly seasonal and sometimes uncertain, but it was far from the constant starvation we imagine. Even the assumption that peasants were ignorant and illiterate requires revision. While formal education was limited, peasants possessed sophisticated knowledge essential to their survival and success. They understood astronomy well enough to predict weather patterns. They knew mathematics sufficient for complex land measurements and business calculations. Many could read and write, especially those involved in trade or village administration. Medieval peasants passed down vast stores of practical knowledge through oral tradition. Agricultural techniques, medicinal remedies, legal precedents, and historical accounts. This was not ignorance but a different form of education, one perfectly suited to their needs and circumstances. Village courts administered a complex system of peasant law that protected individual rights and regulated community behavior. These were not arbitrary proceedings controlled by lords, but democratic assemblies where peasants served as judges and juries. Peasant law covered everything from property disputes to marriage contracts, from criminal behavior to commercial agreements. The sophistication of these legal systems rivals anything we see in modern small communities. Perhaps most remarkably, peasant law often superseded noble authority. Lords who violated peasant legal customs faced organized resistance that could threaten their own positions. The relationship between lord and peasant was far more balanced than popular history suggests. So we return to our mysterious peasant from 1347, who claimed to have more leisure time than a nobleman's son. Was he speaking truth or mere boasting? Consider the evidence. A nobleman's son spent his days in military training, political education, and formal ceremonies. His leisure was structured and purposeful, always serving the needs of his class and station. Our peasant, by contrast, enjoyed genuine freedom during his abundant holidays. He could fish, hunt small game, play with his children, court his sweetheart, or simply rest without obligation to anyone. His leisure time was truly his own. When harvest was complete and winter settled over the village, peasants entered months of comparative ease. They told stories, crafted goods, planned for spring, and enjoyed the fruits of their labor. Meanwhile, nobles dealt with the endless complexities of managing estates, settling disputes, and maintaining political alliances. Perhaps our boastful peasant understood something about happiness that we have forgotten in our rush to judge medieval life by modern standards. The real story of medieval peasant life is not one of constant misery, but of different choices and different values. Medieval peasants traded some freedoms for security, some efficiency for community, some individual opportunity for collective strength. They created a way of life that provided meaning, purpose, and genuine prosperity within the constraints of their time. They were not victims of history but active participants in creating a world that served their needs and reflected their values. The next time you imagine medieval peasants, picture not the ragged figures of Hollywood films, but skilled craftsmen in their workshops, prosperous farmers planting their crops, mothers teaching their daughters ancient songs, and fathers passing down generations of wisdom to their sons. Picture communities where everyone had a place, where work had meaning, where feast days brought genuine joy, and where the cycle of seasons provided a rhythm of life that connected human beings to the natural world in ways we have lost. This was the real medieval world, not a dark age of ignorance and suffering, but a different age with different wisdom, different pleasures, and different definitions of the good life. And perhaps, just perhaps, there are lessons in their choices that we would be wise to remember.